Welcome to the Sacred Stew. I'm your host, James. This is my co-host, Anthony, with me. And tonight we have a very special guest on. We have Mark Puryear from the Norroena Society with us, joining us. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in and listening. I guess I want to start with introductions here. Anthony, it's been a couple months since we dropped the episode. How's things been going for you? Anything new happening?
Oh man, same old same. Got that new job that I was talking about in the last one, so moving up a little bit in the world, that's pretty cool. Got a really big personal landmark coming up for me in the next couple of days, so I'm excited about that. And it's just another rainy day in Portland beyond that.
Yeah, we have clear skies up here today. Mark, I want to introduce you to our audience. I'm sure a lot of people are already familiar with who you are. You've been the main engine behind the whole reconstruction of our lore and our rituals and stuff with the Norroena Society and the work that you do. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you became a pagan and kind of your path to where you're at today?
Yeah, well, man, it's been so long. I've been doing this for about 30 years. I first became a heathen in like the late 80s. I went through several incarnations of that because when I first started, I had a guy, he introduced me to the faith. He just told me that he prayed to the gods. I didn't really gather with him or anything like that. He just told me what it was, and I got interested and started reading it. And then, I back then there wasn't internet or any of that stuff, so we just had to go with what we could find. And so I went to bookstores and I read books, and they ended up being just a bunch of Llewellyn, New Age stuff, and thinking that was authentic and what it was. I practiced that for, it was only about a year, and then I came across Elsa Christensen, and she and I became friends. I wrote to her for a long time, and then came in contact with other groups, other people, learned different things about the faith, learned about how, people talked about how the sources were corrupted and things were taken from us, and we didn't have this and we didn't have that. And I always felt like that was sort of an injustice that needed to be righted. And one day somebody introduced me to the works of Dr. Victor Rydberg, and that changed everything. That was the whole thing. Just opened up my eyes to what we could do and what we were capable of as a religious movement. And I knew then that, we had to figure out how to take this method and turn it into something viable and something that we could create, reconstruct this religion from. And we've been pushing ever since. We started the Norroena Society in the early 2000s and have been going strong since.
I want to back up to something that you said here, because we wanted to dedicate this series of episodes in this season to sort of community building, and there's a lot of aspects to that. We had a podcast a few episodes back about the fathers of ancestral, and it was kind of controversial for some. Some people didn't like some of the things we said. Some people
didn't like some of the things that I said.
That's true. Some people didn't like the things that you said specifically. But, Mark, not to really dig deep into that, but you were around and you actually had relationships with many of these people during that time. Can you kind of give us the backdrop for a little bit of the history of some of these founding people, as far as the sense of the direction that our faith has been taken since its reemergence in the modern era?
Well, I kind of look at it, everything as an evolution. I try not to focus too much on, what people did or what they did do correctly, but really just seeing things as we were where we were in the place we were at the time we were there, And so I often cite the example of when Alexander Rudd Mills kind of first started this incarnation of our religion. They just started an Anglican Church of Odin, which none of us would ever think about. That's not something that's even on our radar. It's so far removed from us today. Nobody's going to start an Anglican church of anything. But that's where they were. And so the movement, it kind of took a big hit after World War II because all things German and heathen became demonized again. But slowly and surely it started to move in its own direction in the 60s when a lot of people started to rebel against the church. You had the hippie movement and all that stuff. And a lot of this stuff kind of developed out of the counterculture movement at the time. And that counterculture movement created, a stepping stone for us to get to where we are today. But it also brought some baggage with it, and some of that baggage is sort of the hubris and the attitude that we don't have devotion, that we should just be sort of this libertarian belief system and all that stuff. And that this isn't like, that's not what this is, And so we see that evolution as part of just our growing as a faith and trying to come back into our own and seeing this as something that we need to recognize as part of who we are, and that we have to overcome what has taken place in the past, and reforge that link between us and the ancestors, And I look at it, a lot of people try to get like this idea in their head that we're going to try to go back as far as we possibly can, go back to the most ancient time. But for me, I want to pick up where we left off. I want to look at like 1000 AD was when the last conversions took place for Northern Europe, and then find out where we were at that point and then move forward. Right. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out like all these steps. And so when people ask me like, what era are you trying to reconstruct? It's like, I'm trying to reconstruct the religion based on what we had up to that moment. And then once it was outlawed and banished, and all that stuff, so that's the thing for me, is that when people see us being critical of things that are happening, we're not doing that to try to make people feel bad. It's the idea is to make people understand that we need to continue evolving. We're still in the Reconstruction era. We haven't just all figured it all out. There's a lot of work to do.
Right.
But it was like this
So
idea pervade where it was like, well, we got enough, so let's just run with it.
Right. I think you labeled it reconstructing the chain of the spiritual beliefs and practices.
Yeah. It's a chain. It's a chain of events. It's like the ancestral chain that links us to the past, and then also links us to our descendants. It's the same concept.
Right.
The idea is that chain was broken, and we know it was broken. And the idea is that we have to look into what we have, the information that we have on this, look at it objectively, not make excuses around it, not try to sort of denigrate it or push it all away, but try to figure out what it was that people practiced, and then use that information to actually rebuild the religion and see it as a religion.
I think one of the common things today, and Anthony, you might have an opinion about this because you've spoken about it in the past as well, is that today with our faith, there's sort of like three different, I guess you would call common ways of viewing our belief system. One is people believe, for example, if I'm just going to put it in the most common term, is that our culture is our faith. Other people have like a belief in just this blood identity makes our faith. And then third, I would say that some people look at it as, and this is really the new ageism coming out, but as a universal faith that it can be practiced by all. Before we get Mark's comments on this, I do want to ask you, Mark, but I'm going to have Anthony throw in any words that he has, but what would be your thoughts on how our religion, or what our religion is for the modern age in practicing it in the belief system? Anthony, did you have anything to add?
So I personally would say that the culture and the blood is about 50-50. Because to me, like, you can have one without the other, but it wouldn't be whole. As far as it being a universal thing, to me, it's an ethnic tradition. when you go to, any other ethnic group and they viewed their faith for their own, especially when those are polytheistic faiths, it's only monotheism that is one for everybody. So, I mean, if our faith is universal to our ancestors, we would be the only ones that viewed it that way. And that just wouldn't make any sense. So I like to try to keep things simple and not overcomplicate it. I'm not super big on comparative stuff, even though there is some value and it does apply in some regards. But that for me, that's what it comes back to, is if we were the only ones that just let anybody do it, we would be the only ones in the world, and that's weird. So,
right. So, Mark, that's our thoughts as far as how some people see it. What would you say to these people with these three different lines of thinking that we see in our religious movement today?
Well, my thing is, I think I try to look at like the ancestral view on it, and then how that can be applied. And because a lot of times I look at the ancestral view, not just because trying to be an anachronist or trying to look only look at the past or something like that. It's because these things worked, and they worked for a very, very long time, and they were purposely destroyed because they worked. And what I'm talking about is there's two different ways to spread your power throughout the world. And this is proven throughout history, right? You can either procreate or you can convert, right? And universal religions seek only conversion. It's the idea of developing a mass. You're trying to just brainwash people. You can create the best propaganda. You can create the best words and thoughts that will sort of, get people seduced into what you're doing. And then you can amass a lot of people very, very quickly. It's not quite as easy to procreate your way into power, right? But that's why you have clans and you have tribes. So in ancient times, people would form alliances and they would marry to each other. I just finished this book, and in looking at the rites of passage, I use the word rites of passage because it's what we typically say, but I didn't want to use that word because it's more than that. There's only two of them that can really be said to be actual like rites of passage, and that's the rite of passage into adulthood and death, right? Because those are the only ones where it's all about like you making a new step. All the rest of them are about bringing families together and connecting them into larger groups. You get married to somebody, that's two families becoming one. You become blood brothers with somebody, that's two families becoming one. You adopt a kid, that's the same thing. Fostering, all this stuff is about growing your clan, growing your kindred, growing everything. Doing so in a way with the oath and with blood, right? And so the thing is that once we were sort of brought into the Roman Empire and under Christianity and all that stuff, that paradigm shifted. And people started seeing that the only way you can amass people is to convert them, because the Roman Empire was very, very successful in that. And that's why these clan systems came under attack and they were purposely destroyed. Because the idea is that it doesn't matter what you do, right? You have all these people talking about race this, race that, right? White people, black people, all this stuff. But all of this stuff evolved through clans and tribes, because clans and tribes are closed off. You don't try to convert people. Now, we obviously know that in our modern era, with the chain being broken, we have to reforge that, and that we do have to convert people right now. But the idea is to eventually reach that goal. And when you reach that goal and you close off, you become an ethnic group. That's how it works. And if you look at tribes throughout the planet, look at pictures of any tribe. Just go on Google right now and pick up the word tribe, and you're going to see a group of people, and every single one of them look exactly the same, because they're an ethnic group, right? And so that's how those markers develop and evolve. And so when you look at it that way, it's like it doesn't matter what the current political idea is behind it. It's still ethnic. And if you do it properly, it will always be ethnic.
So in our last episode that we did, we sort of just touched on the subject of what an individual can do in this age as far as reconnecting to our faith and spirituality. But then there's the next step of, once you come to the realization of what our spirituality is, how do you grow that with a community? How do you take those steps? You wrote a book a few years ago called the Æfinrúnar Book, the Settian Book of Clans. And from my understanding of it is you took a look at the different clan systems throughout Europe, Scotland, Ireland, Germany, and you sort of wrote a blueprint for reestablishing that clan system. Is it actually realistic to be able to do that in today's age?
Of course it is. Because the thing is the first thing that you have to do is, because a lot of these things still exist. And when you look at like really wealthy people, most of them still follow a lot of those principles, even though they don't like to say that they do. Right. And the thing is that combining families is still a tradition that we follow to this day when we get married to people. And it's just that there's this idea that I think the biggest problem is people following their oaths. So many people make oaths towards things and they never want to follow through because they have their own ego or they have things that, they get upset about. We have this culture that we've developed within traditionalism, conservatism, political movements or whatever. And I call it walk away, throw away culture, because it's like, if somebody's not following the path perfectly, we got to throw them out and get rid of them. And I abhor that, because and when you're living in a society, when you're living in a culture or a tribe, you don't get that luxury, but it's like when you're doing it, like the way that people do that, when they're engaging in that, it's basically like, this is just like a pair of underwear you can just throw off and put on and change it and do whatever you want to. And it's like, the thing is that you have to accept that, you're in this for the long run and there is no going away. It's like, if you get married to somebody, you're supposed to stick to it. And that's why like marriages are falling apart now, because when people don't value their oaths, when they don't value their kin, when they don't value their heritage and the legacy they're going to pass on to their kids, then stuff like that just becomes meaningless. And this is like stuff, you talk about Ragnarok and stuff like that, about things just falling apart, the whole world just disseminating and just, completely falling apart because people aren't holding to who they are. And they want these things, they want an identity, they want a culture, but they don't want to do what it takes to hold on to it. And it's like, it all starts with yourself. You have to start in your own heart and say, this is what I'm going to do. And these are the sacrifices that I'm going to make this happen within my own home. And then start teaching other people to do the same thing, so that once people start binding each other to their oaths, they'll stick to them. And that's the most important thing. That's the most important thing, period. It's why it's one of the, the 9 needs is to break your oaths, because making oaths was about building clans. And if you broke the clan down, you hurt a lot of people.
Right. So one of my thoughts on, building those clans in marriage and oath and building families, of course, I mean, that's what the clan is we are so there's a diaspora of our folk, especially our folk that have a leaning towards our native spirituality, is how do we reconnect everybody on a level? Because like you said, there's so many people with different egos and this and that. It can be difficult to find a good group of people. And here in the Pacific Northwest with the wolf pack, we are actually using that Æfinrúnar Book as a blueprint to try to reforge those connections. But I look at it as most of the adults are damaged. We're damaged good. Our society has damaged us in lots of different ways that we could just talk for days about. But the real investment is the children that we're having and we're raising and getting them involved in the rituals and the gatherings and things like this. How does an individual, make that next step? Because the first part is connecting with your own heritage, your own bloodline. In your Æfinrúnar Book, you mention about, finding a family person that you can connect to with other people. But how do you do that with people just having like different family lines and such?
Well, because the family lines, I mean, they connect to one another through the oath, and that's why typically the clans would have like a clan founder, and then the oaths would build that line. I mean, that's what they did. I mean, it's I understand it's like, in today's day and age we have like DNA and we have tracers and markers from different families and all that stuff, but that's not how our ancestors saw it. They just saw people that were all a part of a general culture. And then they would constantly be fighting to see who could grow their clan the fastest and who could become the most powerful, because it came with power. Anything you want to do, if you want it to succeed, it has to have a level of power in it. And that's why I say the Christians came in, and one of the first things they wanted to do is destroy all that. It's because when you have like polytheism and you have different clans and tribes, those clans and tribes sort of disperse the power, right? But they are in and of themselves powerful, because they will stand for their own. They'll die for their own. And you can't have that when you're trying to create a mass global concept, right? Because those people are about their local community, their nation, their tribe, the people around them. They're not worried about somebody on another continent. And so in order to get them to break that apart, they have to, completely destroy the very notion of it. And that's one of the stumbling blocks. We see that like when Amenhotep IV was converting Egypt to monotheism before Christianity ever came around. He first thing he did was just start tearing up temples and breaking up families and separating everybody, and then making them blanketed over this stuff, not because he was so devout to his God, but because this was a stumbling block to his power. And so when you have that structure where it's like, okay, well, I see this whole planet that has all these resources and all this wealth and all this money and these things that I want, right? But then these people who are these individual little cells are all in my way, then I have to make them where they're not an individual cell anymore. You're right. That's why I tell people, like, you see a lot of leftists and a lot of people are always talking about, division is bad. Division is a bad thing. We need unity. Unity is good and division is bad. And it's like, no, that's not necessarily true. There's a level of unity that you need with people around you to help you to stand up against bullies and people who are trying to hurt you and all that stuff. But division in itself is a good thing, because no tyrant has ever come forth and said, you know what we're going to do with this country? Let's break it up into little pieces and then let everybody live on their own and not mess with them. That's not what tyrants do. Tyrants say, let's unite everybody under one single idea, and then we will force them all to believe in that idea. And if they ever rebel against it, we'll just send them to prison or kill them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, history's filled with a lot of examples of that.
Yeah. And that's what it is. I mean, the idea of globalism, which is what Christianity and the Roman Empire represented at the time, was to break that apart, to make this empire where everybody believed in the same thing, because it makes it easy to keep them from rebelling. So when you're about your community and your local people, there's another example of that I was talking to my daughter about. It's the notion of like how we live in today's society, and you used to have it where landowners were the people who were the only ones who got to vote in America, right? And what that did is that built really strong communities. They had really strong families and stuff. And so when the Great Depression hit America, people were arresting their own police officers because they felt like they were working for the banks. And they would have those penny auctions where people would go in and they would buy somebody's ranch back for a penny and threaten everybody else with a shotgun. If you raise it above a penny, we're going to kill you, because they had strong communities. That stuff stood in the way of the banks and all these people from taking over, because these were localized communities that were like, no, we're not playing that. We're not doing that. Sorry. And when you have so many of those that with that same attitude, you can't do anything. If you're a globalist trying to take over the world and you want all this stuff to happen, you have to get rid of that. That's your first objective, is to get rid of all of that, because if localized, strong communities that stand up for each other, they're not going to put up with that. So that's what they do. That's what they did. And then that's what every empire does. If you read the Agricola of Tacitus, you can see exactly a lot of the manipulations and the propaganda that they used in order to subjugate people.
Right. Anthony, you have anything to throw in?
Well, not without throwing my tinfoil hat on and getting us kicked off of YouTube.
Fair.
Mark, with building a strong community, there's going to have to be leaders that arise in different areas, and really because there's a lot of individuals out there that don't know what to do, besides read some books and try to practice on their own, but are clueless as far as actually how to connect, and build a community. And I know that you've been working really, really hard on reconstructing the rituals of our faith and such. And I know that you are also working hard on the Kvassar Academy to have a course out there to train Gothies. But what we really need is those individual leaders out there, those people that are ready to step up and actually start putting their actions towards where their thoughts are at, and learning these rituals and going out into communities and teaching people and helping build those communities. What's the blueprint for that? I mean, how does that work?
Well, the thing is about building a community, and we've looked at how different groups do this, and we're talking to people who do some great stuff. We've made the mistake in the past where we would just meet a person and then we would let them come to bloat, and we have to be more careful than that. We have to vet people properly. We have to, figure out who's coming to what. So what we've seen people do, and what I think is the best model, is to start having like secular events. We thought about doing like fishing events, kayaking events, and stuff like that. People who are interested in the faith, but it's nothing committal. It's nothing where it's like you're just gonna come to our bloat. I think people want to jump the gun, and they just want right now. They want to have as many people there as possible. But you want to have good people there and solid people who will stick around and who are going to be devoted to the faith. The second thing about leaders, people who are in leadership positions, is that the first thing you should do, and you should look for, if you want to be a leader, and if you're a person who wants to find a leader or have a leader in your community, is that people should realize that leadership comes with a passion for what you're doing, rather than simply the desire to lead, right? Because people who just want to lead, they just want a title. I just want to be the grand poobah of something and stuff. Usually those people become destructive, and they start to hurt people, and they abuse people and stuff like that. And we've seen that time and time again, and there are some people who get mad at us for setting up our Gothy course the way that we have, because it's going to take a long time to complete it. But I tell people all the time that, being a Gothy is a lifelong dedication. It's something that starts one day and you take the first step, and then you move on until you're dead, and there's a lot to it. There's a lot of information to it. There's a lot of knowledge. There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of compassion. You have to be that person that gets rid of that walk away, throw away culture. You have to learn how to settle disputes. You have to learn how to fix problems. You have to learn how to make people work together and figure out like how to make this successful. Because if you just have a revolving door, and you think that you're so great because you're so much more pure than all these people, then you're a failure as a leader, because you have people coming and going, and they're not staying for the religion. They're not staying for the community. They're just coming and going, and they're coming in for nefarious reasons or have ulterior motives or stuff like that. And then you find that out, and you don't challenge it or question it because you just want bodies at a bloat.
Right. That is a problem that a lot of organizations and groups suffer from, certainly. And I think that somebody has to kind of approach this, because you can't get so restrictive where, at the end of the day, you're the only person standing in the circle. There's no point in that. We are a communal faith. So even like among the lay people, there should be a kind of an understanding that you're going to have different layers or levels or classes of individuals that are involved in this. You're going to have people that are super connected spiritually to the faith, that are learned. You're going to have people that are going to be the next tier where, maybe they're not the most studious individual, but they're faithful and they're devout in their actions with the community and helping to build it. And then you also have like just those people, the outlier people that just kind of, for lack of a better term, go to church on Sunday. I don't think we should, be so restrictive to not allow, those individuals to come see what it's about. But also it's important to still be protective of your circle. And I think that there's ways of doing that. Like you had mentioned, something that's not even spiritually or faith related, like a kayaking trip or something. Those are really good ways to meet people in the Pacific Northwest. We always have a couple meet and greets, get a good feel for somebody before we invite them to an event, just to make sure, that they're at least expressing and showing with the energy that they bring to our meet and greets that this is something that they're taking serious. But even with that, you still run into problems here and there that have to be dealt with.
One thing that I've been involved with or looked into multiple organizations, groups, leaders, and one thing that I've seen is that there are some people that are very spiritually strong. They know the faith and they're able to do that, but they have no mundane skills of building people, collecting resources, and such. And then I've seen people that, they're able to raise funds, get land, build people, but they have absolutely zero spiritual strength, for lack of a better term. Mark, I'm just kind of curious about your perspective. Is one more important than the other? And how do you balance, and from your perspective, how would you balance that to not just grow the faith, but grow an actual community and tribe?
Well, the thing about that is that I believe strongly that every position matters, right? And I think that those two guys who are doing that, one should take the role of the Gadi and the other one should take the role of whatever you want to call it. And that those two people should work together in order to make something great. The problem is that we take the role of Gadi and we act like there's no other role. We act like nothing else matters. And I did a video on this called the Developing Your Odal. And I talked about how Hindus, when they have celebrations and festivals, the things that they're doing in those celebrations are passed down from generation to generation or generation. They're thousands of years old. And some of it is the most mundane things that you could possibly imagine. The example I always pull out is like one guy was making tea, and him and his family, they just made tea. And there was nothing else to it, but those guys had passed down their recipe and perfected it over hundreds of generations. And that was like their thing. And they would come to the gathering and they would be like, this is our tea. And they would pass around to everybody. And you could see how super proud they are. Look, we're offering this. This is our service to the gods. This is our service to the community. Everybody needs to go into a religion with that mindset. The idea that we all just, a Gadi is like running everything and doing everything and everybody else kind of just sits in the back and gets fed and hangs out, like that needs to go away. We have to be tribes again. We have to work together. Everybody has to be valued and appreciated, and then everybody has to play their part and be responsible. And that's how you build a community. Because what happens is if just one person's doing it and everybody else is sitting in the back, then that person gets burned out and is like, I don't know why I'm wasting my time with this.
Yeah, I think all of us have felt those frustrations over the years. It's a difficult thing growing communities. Kind of leveraging off of Anthony's question there, Anthony and I had a discussion a couple weeks back, and he had posed an interesting question, as you're building a community, how do you prevent that community from forming a cult of personality? And I know you've been one of the main proponents out there propagating, against cults of personality for many years now, because it's a cancer that our modern media has just spread everywhere with misinformation and all sorts of things. But how does a community protect itself from falling into that trap of a cult of personality?
Well, the thing is, when you have any person who's a leader, there's always going to be some form of reverence that needs to happen in order for that leader to be respected, right? The cult of personality comes when that person is just an empty shell, when they're just charisma, when they're just, look at me, I can talk and I can seduce you guys into thinking, well, I'm just so awesome and all that stuff. And it's just their personality. That's all you're worshiping there, And the thing about that is that, like, that's why we push very hard that you need to have a source-based foundation for the religion so that you're not pulled into all these different directions. Your number one weapon from being scammed or hurt or manipulated by anybody is to have a true north, a compass that leads you through anything and everything. So that when someone comes and tries to tell you this, that, and the other, you just like, whatever, that's not my true north, so bye. I had a lesson I taught my little girl one time. I was taking her to a coffee stand, and they had energy drinks there, and one of the energy drinks was called Dragon's Blood or something like that. Sounded really cool. And she's like, "Oh, I want to get the Dragon's Blood." And I was like, "Why do you want to get the Dragon's Blood?" "Because it's called Dragon's Blood." And I was like, "That doesn't mean anything. We don't even know what flavor it is. It's just called that, right?" And she's like, "No, but it just sounds neat." And I said, "Look, sweetie, it's all it literally is just they put a fancy name on it, and then they put red number 5 in there, and then there you go. That's your drink." And she's like, "What's red number 5?" And I explained to her it's just a dye color, right? And I started explaining to her that you get manipulated every day, all day long. There's always people trying to manipulate you in order to get you to do something or buy something or give them power or something like that. And it's okay to buy things you like, to try something and taste it and enjoy it, but know that you're being manipulated. And when you know that, then you have a compass to always keep yourself from being manipulated. And she's used that ever since then. I mean, she was like 3 when I told her that.
Yeah, that's a great lesson for sure. It is a part of the true north compass would be a spiritual foundation in our faith. You released Æfinrúnar Book 1 about 6 months ago, and you just released this week, I believe, Æfinrúnar Book 2. Why are these books important?
Well, I mean, there's the thing is that I've been doing this for 30 years now, and I know there's been people doing it way longer than me and all that stuff, and people got used to a certain way of this religious practice developing. And I have always sought to try to seek the most ancestral, authentic path that I can. And I believe that as a researcher and a writer, that I have to do everything that I can so that if I find new information, I have to present it to people, because then I'm not doing my job correctly if I don't. And so we had a book called the Synda Book that we put together a long time ago. And, it's the same kind of wash, rinse, repeat cycle that you end up in that I'm hoping we're breaking out of, is that you have these excuses in your head. Like, we can't do this. There's just not enough information. We don't have enough source material. We can't recreate this fundamental. We cannot do it. And then you make this discovery, and then you make this discovery. So we had the Synda Book that kind of had a basic layout for ritual, but then we just started making more and more discoveries. So I actually originally set out to make a book 2, like a new edition of the Synda Book, but it just got bigger and bigger and bigger, and we had more and more debates and more discussions. We figured out like the whole calendar system. We had people debating us on one issue after another, and we started making discoveries after discoveries after discoveries. And I was like, this has got to be like its own thing. And once I started doing that, I was like, well, if we're gonna try to make it as authentic as we possibly can, we even need to make the name of it authentic. And the word Æfinrúnar is out of Ríkstula, where Heimdall comes to man to teach him culture, and he teaches them the Aldarúnar and Æfinrúnar, which are the runes of the ages and the runes of earthly life. And we believe that the runes of the ages is the lore, and the runes of earthly life are the earthly practices, the worship of the gods. And so I started doing this research, and I was like, I'm going to just take this apart top to bottom, use all the resources that we have. We've gotten some really amazing resources that allow us to look into every single source imaginable on this stuff, from rune stones to sagas to histories to all over the place. And every single line of information was completely like examined top to bottom. And then once we put this new book out, we had all this information already loaded in our gun, we started putting it all together, and it was like, okay, we can take, not only can we take the traditions that we find in the sources and the stuff that we're putting together in book 1, but then we can actually take the words from the actual sources, like Gylfaginning and the Poetic Edda and all these different sources, and use that to actually show what is spoken. And so every single line of Æfinrúnar is proven. It's all got source material behind it. It's as authentic as you're ever going to get with ritual.
So to separate you from scholars, for example, because in the Ancestral Edda, one of the lines that you've received criticism for is one of your statements regarding, moving past the age of the scholars. And I think you mean that in reference of them not like believing in our faith and then interpreting it. And that's what's been feeding all these generations of pagans for the last 50, 60 years. Would you touch on that a little bit? Why the work that you're doing, or how the work you're doing is different than what the work is that scholars are doing?
Well, yeah, the thing is when I talk about that, I'm not saying let's never use academia. I use academia all the time, right? What I'm saying is we have to get away from their opinions and their worldviews, because their worldviews are not ours, right? There are a lot of Hindus out there who use academics, but understand that academics, especially Western academics, do not know what they're talking about and have no understanding of what their religion is. And so in order to really drive home what we are doing and why we told people that they need to push away from these academics, is we made a series of videos on YouTube, and we're going to be making our last one, which is going to represent us. But we did 5 videos called the Mythological Schools of Thought. And those mythological schools of thought breaks down all of the academic schools of thought on our religion. And every single one of them, and we go through the history, we name names, we tell people where this came from, who developed this, where it first originated, what their ideas were, what their biases were, break it all down in the most minute details, because we knew we had to. And every single one of these schools of thought are a means to denigrate and separate our religion from what it actually was. You have the interpretatio schools, which was the Greeks and Romans trying to conquer people and assimilate them into their empires. So they just told everybody, all your gods are not your native gods. They're Greek and Roman gods that you just reimagined. Then you have the Euhemerus school, which was started by an atheist named Euhemerus, and this passed on to Lactantius of the Christians, who formed it as a part of apologetics. He wasn't the first one, but he was one of the most famous. And then that later became like this movement of Euhemerism, but turned our gods into kings that tricked people and fooled them into believing that they were gods, and they're not the real religion, and Christianity is the real religion, and so on and so forth. Snorri Sturluson was in that school. Then you have, the Eddas go missing for a while. They get rediscovered, and they get basically retransliterated by Christian scholars, and they form the biblical school, saying that all of these sources are just retellings of the Bible stories, and they're just a Vikings way of telling biblical tales for some reason. And then you had the nature school, which is these are just all savages who were just worshiping weather phenomenon, and they didn't really believe in any of this stuff. They would hear the thunder, and the thunder would scare them, so they'd start praying to it, and then they would call it Thor, right? And then you had the archetypal school, which is basically these are all figments of your imagination and psychological phenomenon. And all of these schools, right, like none of them tell you the only thing that matters if you're a believer in this faith, and that it is a religion, and it is the native religion of your ancestors. None of them say that, right? They've all just glossed over because they all have a reason, a different bias, a different purpose for what they're doing. And so we built our schools off the method of Victor Rydberg, because Victor Rydberg was an actual religious scholar who stepped up and said, this is a religion. And it's really like revolutionary that he did that. A lot of people think that's obvious. It's an obvious thing to say. No, it wasn't. Because all of these other academics were saying, no, it's anything but a religion, right? And it's all these different weird things that we've come up with And Ryberg was like, no, it's a religion, and it follows the psychology of religion, and it follows the patterns of religion. And we can see the patterns, and we can see how these sources, one connects to another. And he started building these lines of convergence and building what he saw as an epic chain of events, and saw this as our mythos. And that epic chain of events begins the stages that we, sort of springboarded off of, that you see a massive puzzle that's sort of laid out in front of you. And every single piece we put together is another piece of our culture that we gain back. And then soon we have the entire puzzle. And then once we do that, there's no turning back. There is no more breaking the chain. There is no more being conquered and we lose everything.
So speaking of breaking the chain, this may be a difficult question to answer, but since the chain was broken, about 1000 AD, how can we say that the faith that we are recognizing today is the true faith for our people? How do we recognize that? How do we come to terms with the fact that for 1,000 years we didn't, as a folk, practice our native faith and still survived and still went on? Is there some part of the mythological story that's a part of that?
Well, I mean, there's no way to verify, and there's really no way for anybody to verify, like how their religion was practiced 1,000 years ago. And somebody pointed out to me, they said, even like Hindus, they have a tradition that's unbroken, but they no doubt 1,000 years ago their religion was probably practiced differently than it is today, and that's okay. The idea is that we just try to get as close as we can, and we understand that there are heathen sources that exist, namely the Poetic Edda, and that these sources are valuable to us, and that we should cherish them and then use them as sort of the pinnacle from which we can build all this stuff from. Because what it does is the Poetic Edda then helps us to validate other traditions. And then we can use stuff like the Roman histories and the Muslim histories, like Ibn Fadlan, and we can start to see patterns unfold, and then how each connects to the other. And then once we recognize that, the idea is that you just never contradict the higher sources. The Poetic Edda is on the top. I put the Prose Edda right after that, and then you start going like into Saxo, and then the sagas, and then the histories, and it sort of forms this pyramid of like a hierarchy of what you're doing. And then when you're building that and you see that, you just know that as long as you're trying to adhere to the religion as much as possible, then you're on a good path. And the main basis for that is not to like sit there and be like who's right and who's wrong and all that stuff. It's to build theological arguments that connects us closer to the gods, to focus more on the why than the how. And I think that's kind of where we're getting philosophically and religiously, because for the longest time it was just like, well, we're just going to copy what's in sagas and then we'll just have political debates, And it's like, the thing is that we're not trying to just copy stuff out of sagas. We're not trying to say, well, it's in this saga, so therefore it's holy writ and we've got to do it exactly like this. What it is that you see something that's happening in a saga, you try to validate it through other sources. You try to figure out the theological reasoning behind what's happening, and then you have your why. And once you have that, you start to understand how the faith is practiced. Like, what is the purpose? And I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but the thing is that, like, one of the things that we're looking at is how people dress during gatherings, right? And we've kind of gone all over the place with it and all that stuff. And like we came to the point where we're like, look, we could focus on like what material you're using, or what, exactly what they wore back then, what's native, what's not. But we get to a point where we're like, look, the most important thing is that they tell people that, in the sources, that the priesthood wears white, right? And that white is a symbol of purity. And this is said in a lot of the histories and stuff like that. And it represents their righteousness and their connection to the gods. And then the people, the folk, they wear red, and their red is connected to the blood of the sacrifice and the connection to the gods through blood and through all the different holy connotations that it comes with. And so we have a why there, and not just a what. And that's what you start to build, and you start to understand it, and you're not focused too much on the material stuff. Another one is like the reason why we bloat. We talked about and shown people that the reason why we bloat is because the Jotner are always trying to harm us and destroy us. And the gods are always trying to help us and bless us. And we perform sacrifices to the gods in order to protect our folk from the giants, from the Jotner, from hurting us and causing calamities and distress and pain. And so the gods counteract that. And we get them to counteract that by praying to them and sacrificing them to them.
Right. I think part of the point of like that chain being broken and what we see today is the result of that separation of us as a folk, as a people, bloating to our gods and goddesses. And I'm a proponent of asserting our religion, our faith, our spirituality, the native one. And I think, you touched on it earlier where you say you're trying to go back to view it, the worldview that our ancestors had of the faith and the religion, to understand it. I think that's a really important part of it, because so many people today, and it's hard, it's hard to break out of that mold that you have as a child with all of the media and the schools and giving you all sorts of information. And then when you do try to learn about your native faith, there's so much variance in information that you receive. It's really confusing for people. How do we separate, and Anthony and I, we've talked on this, and he might have some words on it, but the importance of that true north, as you spoke of earlier, how do we take those first steps of I don't know how to say it right. How do we take those first steps of connecting spiritually to something that we don't even know for certain?
Like, how do you take the first step in basically being a heathen?
Exactly, yeah.
I would say, like, the first thing you want to do is and I wouldn't say, like, you want to, like, devote every moment to this, because at some point you want to, let the rubber meet the road. But you do need to educate yourself somewhat. You need to have, like, a basic understanding if you're going to go it alone. If not, I would connect to somebody who has a bit of an understanding of it, so they can teach you, right? And I'll tell you why. A lot of people, especially in the West, we kind of want everything fast. We want it right now. We want it, sort of just wrapped up in a nice little package and handed it to us, and here it is, and now I got it. Now I'm doing it, right? And the thing is that I've met people from other folk religions, right? And these people, even just like the lay people, they spend their entire lives from the time they're little children learning about what the philosophy of their faith is. And I've met a girl who was Vietnamese. Her name was Phone, right? And Phone was a really, really smart girl. She was really devout to her religion. And I met her at a Chinese import store. My buddy was trying to buy something for his girlfriend. And she and I talked, and I just ended up talking to this girl for like 2 hours. And she just broke down like everything that they do. And she could just sit there and tell you about everything. And it was so complex, and there was so much to it. And I was like, this is right. This is folk religion right here. It's not like just pie in the sky, just, I could explain it to you in like 3 minutes type thing. I mean, this girl, you could tell she had like been taught this very diligently for her entire life. And so I definitely say that the first thing you need to do is know the gods, right? And then once you know the gods, you want to know their laws. And then once you know their laws, you want to know how to pray to them and perform bloat.
Speaking of laws, there is a very general concept among modern heathens today about natural law. And they use this sometimes as a way that they describe what our faith is following natural law. What are your thoughts on that topic about natural law?
Well, I mean, the thing is that law needs to be defined. If you just say natural law, like a lot of times people say that and then there's nothing, there has to be some sort of philosophical standard. We have divine law in our faith. There are definitely things that we see an eschatological purpose behind. And no law exists. Like this is one of the things when we first introduced the 9 nids, right? And when we had the 9 virtues that we presented, and people asked us, well, there's already the 9 noble virtues. Like, why don't you just follow that? Blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, the problem is that laws don't matter if there's no eschatological consequence to not following them. They're just nothing. They're just words on a page, right? And so eschatological consequences are part of every religion on the face of the earth. And people who have tried to convince us, and have actually lied to people, trying to convince us that there's no such thing as that in our religion. There's no concept of damnation, and any of that stuff is just Christian, blah, 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 blah. That's not true. The first way that you completely destroy that argument is you ask yourself, is that Christian, right? Does it originate in Christianity? Does the concept of damnation originate in Christianity? And then when you see that there are religions way older than Christianity that have that concept, then you can very confidently say no. All right. And then when you look at polytheist religions, like in the Egyptians, where they weigh their heart out, and if their heart doesn't weigh properly, they get damned to be devoured by a monster for all eternity. Right. Or when you look at the Greeks, who had a very similar model as ours, where they had Tartarus, where people were punished in a fields of damnation. We have it in our religion. So when you see that stuff, that validates the concept of Niflhel, of Nostrans, of the idea that oath breakers and adulterers and murderers, that those people get punished in the afterlife. And so you build the 9 needs, and these are just things that are in the sources. And you see that, and you say, hey, this is the law. This is the hardcore law. There's all kinds of nuances, social things that are recognized, and you're not supposed to do this and not supposed to do that. But the 9 needs are like, that's heavy stuff. That's the stuff that's like you do not allow.
It's like the social contract of our folk that holds us and binds us together and keeps us strong.
Exactly. And every one of those things, I mean, people who are like, oh, well, I don't want to have rules binding me to stuff. And it's like, really, you want to go out and break oaths? You want to go out and murder people and cheat on your wife? Like, that's something you have to do? Like, well, if that's the kind of person you are, please stay very far away from me. And it's like,
right.
those 9 needs that we show, people are like, well, I don't want to be bound by this. Well, okay, well then I don't want to be around you, because you're a disgusting person that would want to do these things.
In regard to the gods and natural law, are the gods supernatural, or do they exist within natural law?
I mean, the thing is about the nature of divinity is that I believe that all things are natural, right? The idea of the supernatural for me is sort of a concept, and I believe that probably developed out of sort of a reckoning with Christianity, where they try to sort of create all these arguments to make their God sound more and more logical than he actually is. None of that stuff is biblical. None of it's stuff that, when they get into creationism and all that stuff, none of it is connected to anything that's ever been said by any Christian in the past. And so, like, in our faith, the gods are immanent, which means they're part of nature. They are within nature, and they are part of elemental forces that exist within the whole universe. And so I definitely see the gods as being actual, real beings. And it's just a concept that we can see when something is way, way more powerful than we are. And a good example of that, just to give you the slightest glimpse of the possibility of that, is a lot of people right now are, getting more and more afraid of the possibilities around this AI stuff, right? Because they see something that could potentially like just dwarf us in power and intelligence and all this stuff. And it's like, and I look at that like that's in an organic sense, not through machines, that's what divinity would be. Something way, way more intelligent, more powerful, stronger, and could reach immortality.
So when you say imminent, and I understand what you're saying, but for our audience, because there are like mystical schools of thought out there where they talk about imminent divinity and arising from a monad, for example, or a singularity. And Anthony and I also had a discussion about this as well. But what's your take, and how would you describe that to people? The divinity aspect. Does it come from a monad? Is it always multiples?
Well, yeah, that to me is like the most powerful argument that polytheists have. And I honestly believe that that's why polytheism developed most of the sciences of the world, because it doesn't hurt us to have science. It hurts monotheism, because monotheism is completely contradictory to anything that you see in the natural world. When you look at nature and you look at all the things around you, there's no such thing as a singularity. Nothing is singular, right? There's no one blade of grass. There's many blades of grass. There's no one of anything, you know. And I've made this point before, that even you yourself, when you're looking in the mirror, you're seeing this identity that you've created for yourself, and this sort of, you know, image of yourself. But you yourself are made of, you know, millions of little cells and creatures and bacteria and molecules and atoms, and you yourself are a multiplicity. So that would tell you that if there is a God who is a singularity, what would that God be made out of? And if he's made out of something, would that not be the more powerful thing? Does that not destroy the whole first cause concept? Because it's supposed to be this God that is a singularity. He is this all-pervasive singular thing, and he was the first cause of all things, and he's the constant, but he's got to be made of something. And if he's made of something, doesn't that destroy that? And then can those things be made of something? Right? Whereas in polytheism, it's not a big deal. That's nothing to us. It's like, because we recognize that multiplicity is part of nature. And as science grows and gets stronger, it just validates everything that we've been telling people. Because all you see is multiples. That's all you see throughout all of nature, all of the universe. The more and more we look, the more and more multiples we see. We see no singularity. There's nothing that makes everything the same. There's many things that makes everything different. And thus unique and special.
So with that multiplicity and the uniqueness that you mentioned, what is the purpose of life for us? What's your take on that?
Well, I see life, you know, you could take it back to the concept of like the web of weird, the web of destiny, you know, that life is, it's meant to grow and find purpose and meaning throughout all of the universe. And when I say that, I mean, like, everything has a destination, everything has a destiny, everything has a thing behind it that drives it forward. And this idea, you know, people have pushed before, that we're all just supposed to live in the moment, or we're put on this earth to be happy. None of that is true. Like, we're here to create purpose and create meaning behind what we do, so that we can pass it on to the next, and then to the next, and then to the next. And then what happens is you create things, and things grow and develop, and life continues moving forward, and that creates an entire purpose for all of humanity, and then all of the other planets and all the other life out there. And that's the web. That's the web of weird, and that's why it's all interconnected.
I've always, you know, as a folk, I've always saw our purpose as to bring order to chaos. I don't know if you'll agree with that statement or not, but I know that there's some people that take kind of a universalist view, and they may label themselves folkish, quote unquote, but they use, for example, like the archetypes. I mean, an archetype has to be universal in and of itself. I mean, that's what the archetype is. And then you see people like Terence McKenna, where they equate all these archetypes between different cultures. Do we as a people have our own unique religion, or is there a religion for everyone, and why is ours important for us?
Well, that's why we did a video on the archetypal school, right? The archetypal school is probably the most prominent today, and it's also the most difficult to kind of pin down, because there's a lot of convoluted things that happen. Because the first thing you have to do is you have to kind of create a disclaimer for Jung, because Jung was a genius. I mean, Jung created a psychological method that actually truly helps people. And you know it does, because he's done it they've used it for thousands and thousands of people, right? But what I tell people is that Jung was from the outside looking in. He was trying to see how the models of ancient religions and stuff like that can be applied with human psychology and actually benefit people from that. Whereas the archetypal school went from the inside looking out, saying that these archetypes inside your mind are just nothing but manifestations of your imagination, and that we all share a collective imagination, and as humanity, and then all of us, they're just different symbols for the same things. Now, there's definitely going to be overlayings and, human experiences. People manifest religions in similar ways, but that does not make them the same. And so a lot of times these archetypists, when you look at them, and especially like the guys who are into like world religion, like the subject of world religion, they're just dabblers. They don't know anything about any religion. It's like the whole adage when, kind of like a friend to all is a friend to none kind of concept. It's like they touch on every religion in the world and yet know nothing about any of them. And so they push this idea that it's all just these symbols, and then you can create all kinds of nonsense. And that's why we talk about in the mythological schools of thought videos, it's that when you create a theory, and that theory can be diluted so far that you can just make anything into anything, then you no longer have a theory. You just have a bunch of nonsense. And that's what almost all of these schools of thought have, especially the modern ones. Because, like Rydberg broke that down in his work about the nature school. That was one of the things that kind of brought him into the forefront, because he went at the nature school and he's like, look, these things that you guys are saying, it's just your imagination. You're just making this stuff up. You're saying that, that Huldr is night and Nana is night and Balder is the sun and this is this and this is that. And, this story represents the falling of winter and the rising of summer. And it's like all of this stuff is just your imagination. You don't have any evidence to back any of this up. And we all just have to kind of take your word for it. And it completely just destroyed the nature school, made them look like fools. But they were so adamant about it. They were like, oh, no, this is what it is. And a lot of times that's just academic gatekeeping. They want to be the guy with the PhD saying, no, this is what it is. You got to listen to us because we have the PhDs. And it's the same thing with a lot of the archetypal stuff. They make these arbitrary loose connections to things and make it out to be like, oh, no, it's exactly the same. Loki is exactly the same as the trickster coyote in Native American tradition. The same deity, which is just absurd. But that's like they're dead serious about that. Like it's the same because it's an archetype. And when you say it's an archetype, that means it's all intertwined. And then it also backs up the sort of globalist mindset that everything is all one. We're all interconnected. There are no differences. You're not unique. You're not special. Just eat the bugs.
Right. Coming to a McDonald's near you soon.
Yes, eat bugs.
Eat the bugs. So, I think Plato was really the first archetypist, and I think that I have a unique view of Jung in a sense. His work, I think, led a lot of people back to recognizing the old gods, which I think is very important. But I think that he kind of deconstructed Plato a little bit. However, it still left so much room for so much just, like you said, take it wherever you want to take it. It can go to the degree in its interpretation of becoming this universal religion for people to follow or believe in. But no, Jung is a hard person to kind of criticize too much because I do feel he sincerely, and this gets back to like some of the fathers of ancestral or the religion and faith in the modern era, is that there was a point where we did have to wake back up, and Jung was one of those pipelines that allowed that to happen.
Exactly.
Getting back.
That's why I say that Jung is important because, we don't want to denigrate what he did, but he is not Joseph Campbell. He is not James Fraser. He's not these people who are all in the same school of thought who kind of bounced off a lot of what the biblical school and some of the interpretation of school, where they just believe that any association you can make between two things makes them the same. And that's just ridiculous. Like you can just do anything with that.
Jumping back to the Æfinrúnar books in the Kvasir Academy that you've been working on and building over the last several years, and tying that with divinity and creation and purpose, what are your books going to do for us moving forward in reconnecting to that chain? Why is that theologically important? And what about people, that, like, you have different organizations and religious organizations that practice different things. And I know it's not about, who's right and who's wrong, but why is it important that we look at your work and follow that work versus just going and following whoever else in whatever organization that's been around for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years?
Well, because the thing is that we all have to reach in our hearts and we have to ask ourselves, do we want to practice our ancestral religion, right? And that's the thing about a lot of this stuff that I kind of, that I do feel needs to be called out, is that when you have people who, stand on the rooftops and bang the drum and are screaming up and down that this is the ancestral religion, this is the ancestral religion, and then you try to tell them, well, I think we can do better. They're like, no, I don't want to do that. And then it's like at some point when we've made so many discoveries and we've learned so many things and we've figured out so much stuff, at some point you have to stop saying that you're following an ancestral tradition, that you're just making things up, because you have the tools now, you have what you need to do this, but you're refusing to because you want to, worship people from the 70s who did this stuff. And, like I said, we all have to evolve. We have to take the step forward. And those things that happened back then had to happen for a reason. We had to step on the plate. We had to figure out this stuff. But at some point you have to say, hey, it's time to take the next step. Because if we just hold on to things that we know are incorrect, then we're not following ancestral tradition. We're rejecting the ancestral tradition. And we're saying we don't want that. We don't want to follow ancestral tradition. We're done with that. We want to be New Agers. We want to follow what we've done all the time, all along, and we're completely rejecting anything that is actually coming from the source material that our ancestors, more than likely practiced. So, and that's the thing, and I tell people, like, the things that we're doing, we're not just giving like Mark Puryear's or the Norroena Society's interpretation of things. These are arguments. They're not interpretations. There's a difference. And an argument is that I can come to you with a piece, with a concept, an idea, and then I show you the evidence for why that idea is valid. That's an argument. An interpretation is just me saying, well, I think it's, like the world tree is just a cosmic thing where it's all connects us all together and all this stuff. That's my interpretation of that. But that's not an argument because I have no evidence for that. It's just what I feel it is. And so a lot of people accuse us of having, the Norroena Society's interpretation of things. And I'm like, no, it's not an interpretation. It's the argument that you can build based on the evidence that we have. And so if you want to follow ancestral tradition, that's what we are trying to do. That is our number one goal. That's our number one purpose behind everything that we're doing. And we have completely rewritten books based off this. Like I said, we had the Synda book, and now that Synda book is null and void because we had to put these two books together. And now we've completely have all new research, all this stuff coming together, and it shows people step by step. That's why we had to do Æfinrúnar Book 1 first, because we had to show people. We know, like, we're stepping on a lot of territory here. We know we're stepping on a lot of people's toes who have been practicing rituals and been doing all this stuff. That's why we knew in order to bring this to you, we have to show you the evidence for it. We have to prove it to you. We have to say, this is what this is. And then we build the rituals and show you this is the practice and this is what you can do. And this is the closest you can get to practicing the religion in an authentic way.
Mark, I feel like you gave some really good examples of people that could be said to embrace the modern approach too much, whether it be, we've touched on universalists, or I've heard the term forward-facing ancestral, or people that only want to go back, say, 50, 60 years. You've talked about trying to go back to the last point where our faith was intact. And we've talked about some people trying to go back even farther. So, like, my question to you is, and I've kind of talked to James about this, is there a point where we become too traditional? And I ask that because I feel like in a lot of respects, the issues facing our folk today, our ancestors could not have imagined. Take any modern issue. I'm trying to be careful about what I say so we don't get struck. But I mean, I realize that's kind of a broad question, but do you think there is a thing as too traditional, and how do we balance bringing what was going on 1,000 years ago into 2023?
Well, yeah, and that's a good question. I absolutely believe that we can be too traditional, and I kind of touched on that earlier. It's like when you get obsessed with the minutia of every single detail, like you're a reenactor or something. It has to be the right material. It has to be the right this, the right that. We do focus somewhat on materials of things here and there, because we feel like that it has some validity to it, and we can build a theological argument around it. But that's the thing about it, is it's not trying to be like uber ultra traditional. It's trying to develop philosophy and theology, because if we can do that, then we are a religion. I've talked with religious people all over the world, from people in Polynesia to people from Vietnam to people to India, and all of these, and I try to get a feel for what it is they do and what is the underlying factor that they have that makes them different from us, because you see the confidence and just the way that they express their beliefs and how it's just a part of who they are. And the thing is that they're not sitting there obsessing over this or another, one thing or another. What they are doing is they are understanding why they are doing what they are doing, and then they make that happen. And then then when they can make it better, they do. They'll create really lavish altars and shrines and stuff covered with gold and all kinds of beautiful things, right? But those items, those objects, they all have a meaning. They all have a purpose, and they're doing it for a reason, because they know the theology, they know what's behind it, they know the purpose behind it, and they have things that really mean something to them. There was one guy that when I met that girl, the Vietnamese girl, I got to go to their festival. They had a ritual that they performed, which was amazing. And they had one guy that would come in, and he was like a special person because he could read like archaic Vietnamese in their ancient language. And he would open up these scrolls and read them during the ceremony. And it was beautiful. It was amazing, And it's like having that knowledge and having that tradition connect to you. That's what's important. On the other end of that spectrum. Let me say, so on the other end of that spectrum, you always want to be guarding yourself from people who want to open the door to New Ageism, right? And I say that because we've literally watched this happen with Christianity. They open the door, they say, well, everybody's a sinner, and the next thing you know, your church is flying rainbow flags, and that's why we have to do this. We have to be strong in our assertions, strong in what we're saying, but not so much that we bog each other down, right? So like the things that we can make theological arguments for, we need to hold true to those and be like, we're not going to compromise this. We're not going to sit there and play this libertarian game with everybody all the time, because that's what you end up with. You end up with the downfall of your civilization.
So I heard a really interesting quote a couple days ago, and it's a very short one, but it says, "Culture is destiny." And I think that kind of ties into what Anthony brought up about the question about tradition as well. How do we, because I know that while you're working to rebuild and reconstruct the traditions of our spiritual faith and practice, how does that bleed into culture? Is that part of the culture? Should it dominate the culture, or is culture something that works hand in hand and with it, or is it something completely different?
Well, I mean, in America, we have no culture, and that's why I've always been very adamant in stating that, we have to rebuild our culture, because it's not connected to us. We're completely severed from it. And in order to have it, we're going to have to implement things, to our kids and teach our kids and sort of let them go through it step by step, so that they can grow up, and then it becomes a part of who they are. And that's how you have a culture. And yes, it must be a culture. That's what we're doing. The 12 fundamentals is looking at 12 different aspects of a culture and then rebuilding them one by one so that we can have that connected to us. And so like a lot of this stuff is somewhat more flowing for people in Europe, because they still live under monarchs, and monarchy is a part of our faith, and they still have a lot of those traditions that they grew up with. They still see those aesthetics don't bother them at all. It's part of who they are. And so like that's how you have to do it. And it's going to take several generations to get it where it's something that's just sort of ingrained in us, but you got to start somewhere.
Yeah, talking about things that are native, obviously in Europe, growing up in Europe, you would natively have the culture, but there's a lot of things that we do in our society, and I know our culture is being destroyed at every twist and turn, but there's a lot of things just culturally in America that we do that still have like the roots of our native culture and tradition. For example, like marriages or certain holidays, things like that. And part of picking up tradition as well is not to be necessarily a person that's so focused on like all the dynamics of the tradition and understanding every single point and aspect of doing it, because there's also the part of just living it, like the Christmas or Yule tradition as we practice it in my house, where when we put up a Yule tree or something, that it's not about explaining, we're raising this tree because it represents Yggdrasil or whatever, that we're doing it because it's just part of what we do every year. It's part of our season. I think that's a really important thing, and it gets back to Anthony's question on, can we do too much tradition? But
I think the thing is that, you can look at it, if you're looking at it from our perspective as in the modern world, is we think of ourselves as individuals who are connected, and we ourselves have to take on the task of, building and teaching this tradition. And that's the problem, because like I said, when you look at the Hindus, they have these traditions and there's a million different facets to it. But every person plays their part. So you don't have to know the entire culture, top to bottom, every single thing. You have different tiers, different people do different things. They focus on different aspects, and then that's their lane, that's their territory, and that's what they learn. And so that's how you manifest this. That's how you make it happen. Different people need to, feel connected to something. This is my area of expertise. This is what I like to do. This is, something I value. And then that person, that becomes their thing, and they present it at every gathering, and they, they're a part of it. You need food, you need musicians, you need mead makers, you need, anything and everything. And then you have people come together and they sort of form this organized chaos that creates a living tradition that brings it to life. And it's something that makes it holy. And it also makes it where it's a legacy. It's something that should be passed down to your kids. This is what we do during bloat. This is what we do. This isn't just a pastime that I enjoy. This is my family's contribution to the gods. It becomes a sacrifice in and of itself.
With my own children, I know that my practice has evolved over the years as I've learned, and I think the key to that, as you said, is just doing it. But at the same time, as we're learning, my son made a comment on Yule this year. He's like, how come every Yule we do something slightly different? And it can be a little bit confusing for the younger children, at least my own, and I'm sure other parents probably have had similar experiences about things. But I thought it was a valid question, and I just explained to him that, well, as we learn more about our culture, which has been destroyed, we are implementing more and more things, and hopefully you'll carry this practice on when you have children and grow up as well. But has your daughter ever brought something up like that?
Well, the thing is, I try to tell people that establishing a tradition is always done through repetition. So the thing is that we had a lot of things that we did pretty consistently for the longest time, but things do change. And what I basically did with my kids when I started writing these Æfinrúnar books is I sat them down and I told them, look, things are about to change very drastically, right? And we're going to pull back on doing the bloats because I don't want to confuse you guys and make you think that, we're always going to be like wishy-washy and not doing things the way they're supposed to be done. So we still performed bloat, we still did stuff, and all that. But I told them, like, once we get this book done, then we're going to move forward and we're going to make this happen. Right after I put this second book out the other day, I had a meeting with my family and we sat down and talked, and we basically broke down what we're going to be doing for Winter Nights. And it's going to be big. I'm about to start carving some new statues of the gods. We're going to be building sacred spaces. We're going to have the wife doing all the food and festivities, and the kids are going to put together the games. And even if it's just us, it doesn't matter, because it'll be something that they'll remember forever. And then once, I think now that we have these books out, like we can start doing the same thing every year. You have to repeat.
My house tradition has been pretty consistent for most of the traditions, but there has been an introduction of new things each year. Like, for example, I still do the gift giving, but I do it over like a 12-day period, just because I've always done that their entire life. And I've mentioned in our Yule episode about our magic stocking thing that we do, which has always been a fun thing. But that part of my next question for you is, what about traditions that people do that aren't necessarily traditional, that don't come from our ancestors? Is it okay to introduce new things into it?
Well, as long as you're not trying to state that this is like some, valid aspect of the religion, because then it's like, it's not, and that's one of the things you see a lot of people do, is they'll take these things that they kind of just run with, and this connects to that, and this connects to that, and that, and that, and that. And then next thing you know, we have like 30 different types of calendars, and there's like 150 types of holidays, and it's so convoluted and so confusing. And like for my kids, I still do Easter stuff with them. I let my kids go Easter egg hunting, and because I want my kids to feel normal. They are around people who are doing these things, and they want to do them, and so I let them do it. It doesn't hurt me, but I don't teach them that that's part of the religion. I just let them have fun and be kids and do cool stuff and enjoy their life.
Isn't that also an aspect of building the odal of your family as well, like a tradition that becomes a part of what your family does, and perhaps extends that to a broader community?
You're talking about like using non-heathen traditions?
Not necessarily non-heathen, but in the sense of like, I guess you could say non-heathen too, something that's not in any sort of ancestral record of something being a tradition. Like, for example, when we go fishing in my family, the first time a person catches a fish, they kiss the fish for good luck, right? Well, nobody could sit and say, well, that's part of the faith, you got to do this or else. But doesn't that tradition add to the odal of the family?
I would say so. I mean, there's got to be something to that, and that's what I'm saying, though. It's just because what I'm talking about is the difference between your family and what you do as a family. And because you can't say that every single action you take is religious. I have family game night with my kids, and we play games and stuff like that, and we watch TV on certain nights, and I try to keep them away from electronics as much as possible, so we play board games and stuff like that. And and that's the thing that we do, and it's something we've always done. And I try to take my kids on trips, and we do a yearly vacation and all that stuff. But I wouldn't tell those kids like this is heathen, but when it is time to bring stuff that is heathen, and it's stuff that we do as heathens, I make sure to strongly emphasize that and explain to them the theology behind it, explain to them the stories behind it. Where does this come from? What does it mean? How does it work? And they just sit around and they're just all wide-eyed about it, and they love hearing the stories, and they love to talk to them about it. I practice jujitsu with my oldest daughter, and she's my middle daughter. I have another daughter that's an adult, but and I was explaining to her how the idea of jujitsu and grappling in general is it connects to the story of the binding of the Fenris wolf, right? Because there's a similar concept in the Tao Te Ching, where you have this idea that things that are hard are strong, but they're not. Typically, things that are hard are brittle. It's the same thing like in metalwork and stuff like that. When you have a metal that's very, very hard, it typically breaks very easily. And the strongest metals are the ones that actually bend and can flex and move. And so you have in the story of the binding of Fenris, you have the idea that they built these chains. First chain they put around him, they convince him to let him put him on it as a game, and he breaks it easily, shatters. And they say, okay, we're going to go build a bigger one. And they go build a bigger one, and they build this even bigger chain. He breaks it off just as easy. Then they create a ribbon, a thin and supple ribbon that bends and moves. And they convince him to put it on him, and he can see that there's something funny going on. And he says, I want to put somebody put their hand in my mouth as a pledge, because I think you're trying to deceive me, right? But then once they put it on him, it moves with him and bends and twists. And I was like, that's jujitsu. That's grappling. That's the idea that you want to be Gleipnir. You want to be that ribbon that's all around them, moving with them, and you're soft and supple, and you're not stiff and hard. And there's a lot of trainers who talk about that stuff, because the more stiff that you are, the easier you are to move, and the more difficult it is for you to move somebody else.
That's a really good example. But let me use a different example. So I know that with the Æfinrúnar Book 2, you talk about in there, and thank you for sharing the advanced copies with a couple groups that we're in. I appreciated that. But you talk about like sanctifying the sacred area where ritual is going to happen, and you talk about the 9 woods and the smoke being what actually cleanses the area. So there's been a tradition in America where, among heathens at least, a lot of them Germanic pagans, do a hammer sign in the different directions. And I know that you've been outspoken about, well, that's not the actual proper way to hallow an area, which I agree with 100%. But I would raise the point that if something that you're doing doesn't necessarily cause harm or is like directly against like a sacred principle for the ritual, that there's no harm in somebody doing that, though. I guess is the best example I could give you on a practical level of actually practicing the faith. What would you say to that?
Harm in doing anything. I mean, I remember a few years ago there was a Universalist group that got made fun of a lot of because they sacrificed a Twinkie to the gods. There's no harm in that, but it's ridiculous. And I'm not saying this is ridiculous. I'm just saying that when people ask me, when we're talking about the religion and trying to develop things, we try to look at the most authentic way of doing it. So we could say things don't, there's no harm in it, but then like, where's your standard? Where do you stop? Where do you say we don't allow this? And so I'm not saying that people are right or wrong for doing that. I'm simply stating that the sacred fire is there and represented in the sources, and walking around the sacred area with that fire is the way to sanctify a stead. So if you have that tradition, it's there in the sources. It's in the Erbiggia saga, and it's in a couple other ones. And it's like, if it's there in the sources, why try to not do that? The need fire is right. Like one of the most holy objects that we have in our religion, and to create the need fire is one of the most important symbols of sanctification. It even has a god that represents it. We believe the Heimdallr is the god of the need fire, and it's like, right. That is significant. And then when you look at like I said, it's just an evolution. People were taking stuff from like the Golden Dawn guys, and they were taking stuff from Kabbalah, and they were taking different things. And that's not to say they were bad for doing that, because they were just like looking at like who's doing ritual and how does it work and what can I do, and they were taking pieces and bits and pieces from all these different things. And it's because they didn't believe that in looking at the Nordic sources that you could actually have a ritual system. But now we're coming along and saying, no, you can. And here it is. And why would you want to not do that?
Right. Now, I agree with your statements. And, like, I believe all the different ways that you, like the need fire, for example, with Heimdallr, like, I specifically call him to, during ritual, to imbue that fire itself and be the deliverer of our gifts if we're giving them through fire, to do that. So, but I guess my point is more or less like there could be an argument made that, well, the hammer of Thor, can only add added protection to that circle. It couldn't.
Yeah, and I mean, I perform hammer signs. The thing that we looked at, right, in building this book is, because a lot of people have had arguments about the sanctification and all that stuff, and it's to try to look at what hammers sanctify, right? Like when you're seeing an actual sanctification of something, and we see Thor does it. We see the funeral pyre is sanctified. We see that the woman's lap is sanctified with it. We see the sacrifice is sanctified with it, and we see runic inscriptions is sanctified with it. So typically, what we see here is that Thor's hammer sanctifies objects, and so I would even say that it would be totally valid to hammer sign the fire. The question that I had when I look at these things is I try to look at them in their core essence, right? Is that if you make a Thor's hammer, right, what sanctifies the Thor's hammer? Because if something's not sanctified, it's just an object. It's just a thing. It has to be sanctified. It has to be blessed. But if you have an object that is the sanctifying object, then what sanctifies that object? You just get another hammer, but then you got to get another hammer and another one, and you try to figure that out. And that's why the fire is so important, because the fire is eternal. The elements are our first cause. They are the epicenter of creation, and they were already latent within nature before Gunungagap. And so all of that is there, and that's why that fire is such a powerful sanctifying force, because it can't be sanctified. It is already pure.
We Anthony actually gifted our clan a very beautiful hammer. I don't know if I've shared the pictures with you yet, Mark, but we actually had a ritual for sanctifying that hammer, and it did involve the elements of the earth and the fire and such. And yeah, I credit learning that information from you, of course. You're one of the most learned people. I don't agree 100% with all of the conclusions that you've come to on every single thing, but most of it, I believe and I promote to be very sound practice of our religion.
Well, I listened to an author one time speak, and he said that your number one goal of being a writer is to not tell people what to think, but to teach them how to think and to be critical of you yourself, right? So that's why I say, like, you give people that true north, because I tell people this all the time. Don't listen to me. I am not your guru. I am not out here to be your grand poobah. I'm here to rebuild this faith. I have a calling in this. This is something I feel like the gods themselves told me specifically to do. And I had a dream about it one time, and I don't know if I've told you guys about that, but
well, you told me the dream, and that's always stuck with me. I don't know if you remember, I told you my dream as well, and the symbology and the dreams with the house and the fence and that person was very, very similar, eerily similar, and then we encounter each other and become interwoven in our life work.
Yeah, and that's something that, like, I feel is my calling. And so I'm not out to be like some, cult of personality. I'm here to build this faith. I'm here to wake the ravens, and for your listeners who don't know the dream that I'm talking about, it's not just the dream that I had. It's the significance of the moment that I had it, because this moment that I had this was the night that I finished writing the Alsa, right? And I had a dream where I was in my old neighborhood, and I was hanging out with some friends of mine, and this old man comes walking in front of us, and we were on private property, so we're like, why is this old dude like walking in front of our house? And so we were sitting there talking about it, like debating what we should do. Like, why is this? He's on private property. Why is he here? And then he turned a corner as we were debating, and we said, well, let's go ask him what's going on. Why is he walking through our neighborhood? And we go looking for him, and we're walking around trying to find out where he went, all that stuff. And I ended up kind of breaking off from everybody, and I saw a hill. And this hill was surrounded by an iron gate or an iron fence that had a gate on it, one of those like old timey ones with the spikes and stuff. And on the hill was yellow leaves that just made the whole thing look almost glowing. And on top of the hill was a tree, and that had the beautiful like yellow leaves. And I could see from the distance all these black spots on the hill. And I didn't know what they were. And then I saw the old man standing on next to the tree. And as I got closer, I went up there and I opened the gate and I walked through, and I see that all those black spots were dead ravens. And I didn't know what was going on. The old man is squatting over one of the ravens, and he looks at me and he goes, shh. He puts his finger to his mouth and he touches one of the ravens. And then one of the ravens starts twitching and comes to life. And he looks at me and says, you can do it too. Just touch one of them. And so I touched one and he touched one. And then we started touching these ravens. As we touched them, they swarmed around us and they started forming this like tornado, this torrent around us. And they built up, and I could feel the wind on their wings and all this stuff. And it just became like this huge cacophony of these ravens just, cawing and blowing the wind and all that. And then I woke up. And that was the night that I finished the Alstretta.
And I know some people are skeptical about like people that have dreams and listening to their dreams and such like that. But really, when you look at our faith, and I think you actually stated this in the Æfinrúnar Book 1, that without fatalism or without like any of that, there's no divination. It can't exist if there's not a fate.
Without a pattern, you can't look into it. Right.
Right.
Fate is.
Well,
Fate is a pattern of existence, and if there is no pattern to the existence, then you can't see it.
Exactly. And which leads me into my next question is, how do people individually connect spiritually with the gods? I mean, like, is there a Gnostic type of system or way of connecting to the gods?
It's Galder. So one of the things that we have in this book, and I really can't wait for you guys to get through that. I haven't really talked about this to a lot of people, but we went over the what we call the true fylgir, which are just basic rituals, some of the preliminary rituals, like ablution, which is called bloat bath, and building the need fire, and then we go into bloat. We go into some of the rites that initiate somebody into priesthood, and then the final section we do a section on Galder. Now, in looking at the Galder, I think that the purpose behind it is to try to get the gods to sing with you. And I say that because we do know that this took place on the battlefield, that when they would sing the shield song, that they knew that they were going to have victory if they felt Odin singing with them under their shields. And I think that was probably more universal than people think, because that would be the purpose for Galder. If the gods are singing with you, they're answering your prayers. And so Galder is an extremely powerful way of connecting to the gods. And so what we did, right, is we went through and we properly defined Galder. Now this is a huge milestone, because for the longest time, everybody's been fooled into believing that Galder is not what Galder is, that Galder is just chanting rune names. And that's not what Galder is at all. There's nothing in any source anywhere that says you chant rune names. And some people said that that's like a Kabbalah practice or something, where they chant like letters of the Hebrew alphabet or something. But it's not in any source. I've never found a source that states anything about chanting runes at all. And so the thing about it is that in Ynglinga Saga, we see that the gods are called the Galdra, which means the smiths of Galder, right? And we also have a verse form called Galdralag, which means the verse form of Galder. And so what we did was we went through all of the sources, and there was an academic paper that guided us on this, and it basically, we cataloged every single one of the Galdralag verses, and then all of the verses where it's not Galdralag, but the poem is saying that this is used as Galder, and then we cataloged all of it and showed you what you're using it for and why you're singing it. And it covers so many. There's like 60 verses, which is crazy, because we had this tradition like right under our noses all this time, but because everybody thought that we were supposed to chant runes, nobody's been practicing Galder. And it's like, this is reborn now. This is rebuilt. And so that's one of the arguments that I made with the Sather people. People get mad at us, say that, because we tell people that Sather is black magic. But it's like, once you see the grand scope of what Galder is, there's nothing left for Sather to be other than black magic, because it covers everything you could possibly imagine. Every little practice, every single thing you've been doing, every single thing you can imagine is all covered in Galder. And then we see expanded upon in the Anglo-Saxon Galder, and then the Merseburg charms and all that stuff. That's all Galder practice, and it has a wide variety of uses and purposes behind it. And Sather is black magic, and it just got convoluted in a couple of sagas, and then people tried to make it like, oh no, it's not that. It's just it's holy. It's this, that, and the other. It's like, no, man, all that stuff is covered in Galder.
Yeah, I think that a lot of that had to do with Christianity just calling everything Sather, because we had an understanding of what Sather was, i.e. black magic. And so they would call any of our ritual practices that were, for example, like Galder, Sather, just in general. They would just call it that.
And there's only a couple sagas that do that. I mean, most of them say that Sather is bad. They reject it. And the Poetic Edda, which we say is the heathen source on this, it says that Sather comes from the Jotner. In Hindlu Yod, I think it's 22, says that it comes from. No, I'm sorry, it's 39, and then it's Voluspa 22 that talks about Sather is practiced by evil people, evil women, and then it says that it's originated from Svartholfi, who's probably Surt, and that this comes from the Jotner. And the Galder comes from the gods, and in every single instance of the Galder is mentioned, it's called good or beneficial, or it's prayed to, please sing Galder over me, please protect me with your Galder. Whereas Sather is, explained in Ynglinga Saga to bring something forth that can bring ill luck or death or harm or switch somebody's wits with another person, manipulate them, poison them, do all kinds of bad stuff to them, right? And Galder is always something that's holy and protectful and beneficial to people. And so that's what it is. And so now the Galder tradition is completely rebuilt, and we can actually move forward and create more. If we wanted to, just use the proper verse forms, and that's what you're going to have. And so if you want to connect to the gods, the Galder is the best way to do it. And then, and I definitely believe that there is a place for personal prayer. Personal prayer we have in this book called the Husblot, which is the bloat of the house, and that's personal private worship. Then you have the personal prayers that you would make using the Undvigasuler, which is a prayer pole. It's not a God pole. It's not sanctified as a God pole. It's sanctified as a God pole, and then you pray by driving nails into it. And each nail represents a prayer.
Why is it important to do the rituals in these ways?
Well, I think that its importance is, like I said, it's an ancestral link. It's a connection to something in the past for us in the present, and then something we can pass on to future generations. And that's why it's important for us to get it right. Because if we get it right, then we are picking up the pieces that were left off. Our ancestors were murdered for this. They were murdered for practicing stuff. The stuff that we're doing today, we would all be rounded up and put in prison or outlawed and killed, right? And so it obviously meant something to them. It obviously was something that was valuable, something worth dying for to them. And they were forced to believe this stuff, the Christian stuff. And then they were, we found the laws, like the Grey Goose laws and stuff like that. I've read over that. And like they even outlawed the berserker rage. They made that illegal to go into a berserker rage. And it's like they outlawed every single aspect and facet of it they possibly could, and told them, you cannot worship these gods anymore. Your gods are not valid. They're not real. This God is real. Your gods are fake. And all of you, anybody who denies that is going to be murdered. And it's like, why wouldn't you stand up for that? Why wouldn't you take up the mantle of that and say, I'm going to fight for them, for the memory of those people who lost their lives defending this and protecting it and being devout to their gods. And they were killed by evil people who wanted to create some kind of globalist empire and destroy everything that they were. And we still face a lot of that today. And we know a lot of the people who hate us and attack us, that if they had half the chance, they'd probably do it again.
I agree with that statement. So with the ritual connection, you mentioned Galder's the way to start, spiritually connecting. The bloat itself, during the performance of it, Galder is chanted, and the goal there with the offering and the Galder is that the gods are singing along with you at the same time, and that helps protect you against ills that can happen to you over a period of time. So
let me. I don't want anybody to mix my words. So the reason why there's 9 needs, and these 9 needs, you know them, are mentioned on runestones, right? In exactly that way. And I believe that the reason why is because if you look at it logically, you have, like, everybody in the world is going to have different things that bugs them or bothers them or has problems with, the things that are harming them, things that they feel are bad or whatever. And all of those people are going to have different complaints and issues, and you can't cater to everybody. You couldn't possibly perform a bloat. That's why Havamal says, you shouldn't over bloat. You shouldn't bloat too much. And that's because everybody's got a complaint. So what they did, you have a system of 9 needs, and these just reflect the overall things that would afflict a community negatively and bring harm to them. And that way you have your 9 public bloats, 3 festivals, 3 bloats each festival, and those cover basically the basic grounds of things that could hurt the community. And then you would have Husbloat, which is your private ceremonies, and those would address the needs of your family.
Anthony, you have anything you want to throw in?
Not at the moment, no.
We've been on the phone here for a couple hours now, but Mark, with Æfinrúnar Book 2 coming out, where can people find that?
Everything we publish is always through Amazon because it's just easier for me. I'm a very busy person, and I try to use other publishers, and they're just a mess. And Amazon's getting to be a mess. It's the best out there. I'm still trying to get the books on Kindle. That's why I say Amazon's getting to be a pain, because it used to be super easy. You just put it in there and it'd go, and then within a couple of days it'd be on Kindle. But I've literally been spending weeks trying to get this Æfinrúnar 2 up and on Kindle, and they're just not doing it. I don't know why.
Where can people find you, Mark? Norroena Society.
So our website is www.norroena.org. We're also on Facebook. We're on Telegram. Yeah, mainly those 2 platforms.
YouTube. You don't release as many videos as you used to.
Well, we're going to change that. That's going to change. So, like I said, I have been putting every hour, every minute I could into writing these 2 books. I mean, I told my wife, like, I'm probably not going to write another book for at least a year, because this is just taking so much of it. I've been working on this for like 4 years now. And it just takes up so much of my time. It takes time away from my kids and my family and all that stuff. And we want to start making videos again, because I can do those pretty quickly. And I want to, we're going to start doing like some high quality stuff. We're going to start doing some more like documentary type videos and some more things where it's like cinematic and actually shows people source material and stuff like that. So I feel that those are more educational and help people.
Right. Yeah, my kinsman Noah was over at my house last night, actually. We had a game night here. Played Risk. I won. I dominated the world. But but he had mentioned about working on a project with you to begin recording some of the rituals and such.
Yeah, because Noah's got an amazing singing voice. And I'll tell you guys one thing. I don't know if he told you about this, but we actually found musical notation for Havamal.
Yeah, he did. I shared it on the Sacred Stew channel too, and I've been sharing some of his chanting and songs and stuff. He's a very talented individual.
Yeah, there's also one for Voluspa, but we haven't put that out yet.
Oh, really? That's interesting. You have to share that with me behind the scenes.
Yeah, I mean, I can put out the notation. I just wanted to try to get the singing and all that stuff together, because I would see the one for Voluspa as something to sing, like the story, like narratives, like Voluspa is a narrative, and then Havamal is something more ceremonial and ritualistic, because Havamal is the epicenter of basically everything that we put into understanding ritual and what it is, because Odin talks about the 9 Fimbuljóðir and hanging on the tree and all the different runes, the charms that he gets from that and all that stuff.
Well, I'd love to have you back again, and perhaps even talk about like specifically like different aspects of the gods and stuff, because I think a lot of people out there, they read all these different books that explain who or what the gods are, and I think you have a really good take on everything. I've learned a lot from you personally over the years, and just on a personal level, my wife and I this morning, we were having a debate, so you have to answer a question for us. How tall are you?
6'3".
That's exactly what I told her. She did not believe me. I was like, Mark is taller than he looks in his videos. And she's like, I don't remember him being taller than you. And I'm like, I'm only 6'1". She's like, well, how tall is he? I was like, he's like 6'3". He's bigger than me. He's a big guy. But Anthony, you have any parting words?
No, I just appreciate the time, man. This is the first time I've been able to talk to you, and I got a lot of value out of it. So thank you.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Hey, I appreciate you coming on, and I know that you've listened to a couple episodes, but I hope that you've listened to many, I hope, and I hope that we're out there presenting a good perspective on our faith for our followers and people that listen to our podcast. I always feel honored every time that we talk, and I think, I know you're not trying to build a cult of personality, but I definitely feel like you're a person that once you pass to the next life, people are going to have some reverence for you in the work that you've put in reconstructing this. So I appreciate it.
I do. I appreciate that, man. I really do.
This has been The Sacred Stew. Our guest has been Mark Puryear from the Norroena Society. Y'all have a good night.